Please, Idris, the storm is worsening, and I have nowhere to go. Then let the frost claim you, Hadria. You were a transaction that no longer bears profit. Do not look for me. You are a ghost to the Stonevale name now. The carriage door slammed. A sound like a pistol shot cracking the winter silence. Hadria Westmere stood trembling in the snow, watching the Stonevale crest fade into the white abyss. She did not cry. The cold had already frozen her tears. She turned to the road, expecting death, but hearing instead the thunder of different hooves, and the arrival of a man who owed her nothing but hate. The wind did not howl. It shrieked, a piercing, mournful cry that tore through the thin wool of Hadria Westmere's traveling cloak. It was the winter of 1842, a season the elders in the village would later claim was cursed by the devil himself. But for Hadria, the curse was not atmospheric. It was personal. It bore a name, Idris Stonevale. She stood at the crossroads of the King's Highway and the old drover's path, a desolate patch of earth, miles from civilization. The Red Lion Inn, which Idris had promised would be open, stood dark and boarded up, a skeletal structure against the gray, churning sky. Snow had begun to pile against the hem of her dress, soaking the fabric, turning it heavy and stiff like lead. Hadria clutched her reticule against her chest, her knuckles white. Inside was 5 pounds, a pittance, and the letter that had dissolved her engagement, stripped her of her dowry, and shattered her reputation, all in a single morning. Idris had brought her here under the guise of an elopement, a romantic flight to Gretna Green to bypass her controlling guardian's greed. It had been a lie. It had been a disposal. "He left me," she whispered, the words snatched away by the gale. "He truly left me." Her mind replayed the cruelty of his parting face. Idris Stonevale, with his golden hair and silver tongue, the man she had thought was her salvation from a loveless house, had looked at her with eyes devoid of humanity. "Your father's debts are deeper than my affection, Hadria," he had sneered. "I cannot marry a pauper, no matter how pretty. Wait here. Perhaps a tinker will take you." The cold was insidious. It began as a sting in her fingers, then a dull ache in her bones, and finally, a terrifying drowsiness. She knew she should keep moving, stomp her feet, scream for help, but the silence of the countryside was absolute. The snow was falling faster now, thick flakes that obscured the horizon, turning the world into a claustrophobic room of white. She sank to her knees. It was easier this way. The pain was receding, replaced by a strange, floating warmth. She thought of her mother, long dead, and wondered if she would see her soon. She closed her eyes, bowing her head against the trunk of a withered oak tree. "Let it end," she prayed. "Let the shame end here." But the world was not done with Hadria Westmere. Through the veil of wind, a sound emerged. Not the wail of the storm, but a rhythmic, deep percussion. Drums in the earth. Hooves. Iron-shod hooves, striking the frozen ground with immense power. Hadria forced her eyes open, her lashes heavy with ice. Twin lanterns cut through the gloom, yellow eyes growing larger, brighter. A carriage. A massive, black equipage drawn by 4 coal-black horses that steamed in the frigid air. It was moving at a dangerous speed, the driver shouting to the beasts. She tried to stand, to wave, but her legs refused to obey. She was a statue of ice. The carriage thundered past her, the wind of its passage nearly knocking her flat. They didn't see me, she thought, a final despair crushing her heart. But then, the screech of brakes. The carriage skidded, the horses rearing as they were pulled up sharply. It had stopped 50 yards down the road. A moment later, a figure jumped from the carriage. He did not wait for a footman or a step. He landed in the snow with a heavy thud and began to run toward her. He was tall, enveloped in a greatcoat with a high collar, his stride long and purposeful. As he neared, Hadria saw him clearly for the first time. The sharp, angular jaw, the eyes as dark as the storm clouds above, the scar that ran through his left eyebrow, giving him a permanent expression of skepticism. It was Garrick Hollowthorne, the Duke of Blackwood. Fear spiked through her lethargy. Garrick Hollowthorne was Idris Stonevale's sworn enemy. Their feud was legendary in London society, a war of politics, land, and old blood. If Idris was the golden boy of the Tun, Garrick was the dark wolf, reclusive, powerful, and utterly ruthless. "Stonevale!" the Duke roared over the wind, mistaking her for his rival in the gloom. "Is that you, you coward?" He reached her, his gloved hands gripping her shoulders, shaking her. When he saw her face, he froze. The fury in his eyes vanished, replaced by a shock so profound, it momentarily silenced him. "Miss Westmere." His voice was a deep rumble, vibrating through her chest. "What in God's name?" He looked around, scanning the empty darkness. "Where is he? Where is Stonevale?" "Gone," she rasped, her voice a broken shard. He left." Garrick stared at her, processing the impossible cruelty of the scene. The boarded-up inn, the lone trunk in the snow. The woman he knew only as the prize his enemy paraded around ballrooms, now discarded like refuse. He cursed a harsh, guttural sound. Without a word, he swept her up into his arms. He was immensely strong, lifting her, as if she were made of hollow glass. "No," she whimpered, terrified of his reputation. "He hates you. You hate—" "Silence, madam," Garrick commanded, though his grip was surprisingly gentle. "If you speak, you lose heat, and you have none to spare." He carried her to the carriage. The warmth that hit her when he opened the door was like a physical blow. He deposited her on the velvet squabs and immediately began stripping off his own greatcoat. "Jasper," he barked to the man on the driver's box. "Turn us around. To the manor, now." "But, Your Grace," the driver shouted back. "The council meeting in London? To hell with the council! Ride!" The carriage lurched into motion. Inside, Garrick wrapped his heavy coat around her shivering form, tucking the edges in with brisk, efficient movements. He sat opposite her, his face grim, his dark eyes cataloging every sign of hypothermia. The blue tinge of her lips, the tremors racking her frame. "He left you to die," Garrick said, more to himself than to her. The realization seemed to settle heavily on his shoulders. He looked at her, really looked at her, not as Stonevale's fiancée, but as a woman freezing to death in his carriage. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. Hadria could barely move her jaw. "Ruined," she whispered. "No money." Garrick's expression hardened into granite. He reached into a compartment and pulled out a silver flask. He uncorked it and held it to her lips. "Drink. It is brandy. It will burn, but it will help." She swallowed, coughing as the fire liquid hit her throat. Tears finally began to leak from her eyes, hot and stinging. "I am sorry," she sobbed, the humiliation finally breaking her. "I am sorry to burden you, Your Grace. I know you despise my family." Garrick looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. He reached out, hesitating for a fraction of a second, before brushing a wet strand of hair from her forehead. "My war is with Idris Stonevale, Miss Westmere," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And tonight, he has given me a weapon he will regret forging." He leaned back, watching her as the carriage gathered speed. "Sleep. You are under the protection of Blackwood now, and the cold cannot touch you here." Hollowthorne Manor was not a house. It was a fortress disguised as a residence. Built of dark gray stone that seemed to absorb the moonlight, it sat atop a jagged rise of land, overlooking the Weeping Valley. It was a place of imposing Gothic arches, high towers, and a reputation for silence. The carriage thundered into the courtyard, the horses frothing. Before the wheels had fully stopped, the front doors were thrown open. A stream of yellow light spilled onto the cobblestones, and servants descended like a well-oiled machine. "Jasper!" Garrick shouted as he stepped out, once again carrying Hadria in his arms. A man appeared from the main entrance. Jasper Hawklight was not a typical valet. He was a man of indeterminate age, with steel-gray hair tied back neatly, and eyes that missed nothing. He had served Garrick since the Duke was a boy, and he was the only person alive who dared to speak freely to him. "Your Grace?" Jasper's eyes widened slightly as he saw the bundle in the Duke's arms. "Is that a woman?" "Prepare the blue chamber," Garrick ordered, sweeping past him into the grand foyer. "Get Mrs. Winifred, and send a rider for Dr. Harrow, immediately." The blue chamber? Jasper hurried to keep up, his limp, a souvenir from a hunting accident years ago, barely slowing him down. "But that is the Duchess's suite. It hasn't been used since your mother." "Do as I say, Jasper," Garrick's voice echoed off the marble walls, startling a young maid who was dusting a bust of Caesar. "She is frozen through. Stonevale left her on the high road." Jasper stopped dead. Stonevale. He looked at the pale, unconscious face of the woman. "Miss Westmere, go." The next hour was a blur of frantic activity. Hadria was dimly aware of being carried up a sweeping staircase, the scent of beeswax and cedar filling her nose. She was laid upon a bed that felt like a cloud, soft and vast. Hands, gentle female hands, were stripping away her frozen, sodden clothes. "Oh, you poor lamb," a voice clucked. This was Winifred, the housekeeper, a woman built like a mesmerizingly efficient battleship. "Look at her skin, Xylia, marble cold. Bring more hot bricks for the foot of the bed. And the mustard poultice." Hadria drifted in and out of consciousness. She saw flashes of firelight dancing on a painted ceiling. She saw a face looming over her, Garrick, his cravat undone, his face pale with worry. "Why does he care?" she wondered in her delirium. "I am the enemy." Sometime later, the doctor arrived. Dr. Harrow was a severe man with spectacles that magnified his eyes. He poked, prodded, and listened to her chest with a wooden tube. "Exposure," Harrow announced, his voice carrying to where Garrick stood by the fireplace. "Severe chill. Her lungs are congested. The next 24 hours are critical, Your Grace. If the fever spikes." He left the sentence hanging. Garrick stared into the flames. He held a crumpled piece of paper in his hand. Winifred had found it pinned to the inside of Hadria's cloak. It was the note Idris had written. "My dear Hadria, circumstances require pragmatism. You are a sweet girl, but sweetness does not pay mortgages. Return to your uncle if he will have you." 1. The callousness of it made Garrick's blood boil. He knew Idris was a vain, shallow creature. But this? This was attempted murder by negligence. "She stays here," Garrick said, turning to the doctor. "Spare no expense. If you need medicines from London, I will have them fetched." "It may cause talk, Your Grace," Jasper murmured, stepping out of the shadows. "An unmarried woman, the fiancée of your rival, staying in the ducal suite?" "Let them talk," Garrick snapped. "Let every gossip in the ton choke on their tea. She is not going back to the cold." For 3 days, the fever raged. Hadria tossed and turned, trapped in a nightmare of endless snow. She called out for her mother. She called out for Idris, begging him to stop the carriage. And strangely, she called out for the dark wolf to save her. Garrick sat by her bedside for hours, ignoring his correspondence, ignoring the mounting pile of invitations to balls and hunts. He watched her fight for her life. He studied the delicate arch of her brow, the stubborn set of her jaw even in sleep. He remembered seeing her across the ballroom at the Ashbourne masquerade 6 months ago. She had been wearing pale blue, standing beside Idris, looking like a captured bird. He had dismissed her then as just another empty-headed debutante chasing a title. I was wrong, he thought, watching her chest rise and fall laboriously. You are stronger than him. You survived the storm. On the 4th night, the fever broke. Garrick was dozing in the wingback chair when a soft sound woke him. He opened his eyes to see Hadria looking at him. Her eyes were clear, a startling shade of violet blue identical to the winter sky at dusk. You stayed, she whispered, her voice rough. Garrick straightened, smoothing his waistcoat. He felt strangely exposed, having been caught sleeping. I merely wished to ensure my guest did not expire on my best linens. A faint, ghostly smile touched her lips. Your valet, Jasper, he told me. He told me you carried me. Jasper talks too much. Garrick poured a glass of water and brought it to her lips. He supported her head as she drank, his hand large and warm against her neck. When she finished, she looked at him with a clarity that unsettled him. Why, Your Grace? You know who I am. You know my uncle, Lord Westmere, slandered your father's name in Parliament. I know, Garrick said, setting the glass down. But sins of the father are not the sins of the child. And I do not leave wounded creatures to die in the snow, Hadria. He used her given name. It hung in the air between them, intimate and improper. I cannot stay, she said, looking down at the quilt. I am ruined. When society finds out Idris cast me aside, and that I have spent nights under the roof of a bachelor duke, I will be a pariah. I must go. Perhaps I can find work as a governess in the north. A governess? Garrick laughed, a harsh, dry sound. With your face? With your history? They would eat you alive. I have no choice. Tears welled in her eyes again. I have nothing. No dowry, no family that wants me, no reputation. You have one thing, Garrick said softly. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit snow. You have the truth. You know what Idris Stonevale really is. The truth does not buy bread, she countered bitterly. No, Garrick turned back to her, his silhouette imposing against the light. But power does, and a title does. Hadria frowned. I do not understand. Garrick walked back to the bed. He looked down at her, his expression intense, calculating, yet underscored by a strange new protectiveness. Get well, Miss Westmere. Recover your strength. Because when you are strong enough to stand, we are going to make Idris Stonevale wish he had never been born. Recovery at Hollowthorne was a slow, surreal experience. As Hadria regained her strength, she began to see the manor not as a fortress, but as a living, breathing entity. She learned that Winifred, despite her stern exterior, had a weakness for romance novels and snuck extra portions of custard onto Hadria's tray. She learned that Jasper Hawklight was fiercely protective of the Duke, because Garrick had once paid for Jasper's sister's surgery without being asked. And she learned about Garrick. He was not the monster the gossips painted. He was a man of heavy burdens. He managed his estates with meticulous care, knew the names of his tenant farmers, and spent his evenings in the library reading engineering schematics to improve the drainage in the lower fields. He was serious, yes, intense, certainly, but there was a quiet nobility to him that Idris had never possessed. Idris had been all light and laughter, but hollow inside. Garrick was all shadow, but solid as oak. A week after her rescue, Hadria was finally allowed to leave her room. Dressed in a gown of dark green velvet, hurriedly altered by the maids from an old trunk in the attic, she descended the grand staircase. She found Garrick in the library. He was standing by the fireplace, reading a letter. His face was thunderous. Your Grace? He looked up, crumpling the letter in his fist. Hadria, you should be resting. I have rested enough, I feel, useful. I cannot simply sit here. She gestured to the room. Is there something wrong? Garrick threw the crumpled paper into the fire. Your uncle, Lord Westmere. He has heard rumors of your whereabouts. He demands your return. He claims I have abducted you. Hadria went cold. He wants to sell me again. There is a merchant in Bristol he spoke of. A man 3 times my age. He will not touch you, Garrick said, his voice low and dangerous. I have sent a reply informing him that you are under my protection. But for how long? Hadria stepped closer, desperation in her voice. Do you not see, your grace? I am a stain on your household already, the servants whisper. Soon, the ladies of the Ton, Lady Zephyra, Yvonne, they will descend like vultures. They will say, I am your mistress. Let them say it. I cannot, Hadria cried out. I have my pride even if I have nothing else. I cannot be your charity case, and I will not be your mistress. I never asked you to be my mistress. Garrick crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped, inches from her. She could smell the scent of sandalwood and old paper on him. The air in the library seemed to crackle with tension. Then what? She whispered. What am I to you? Garrick looked down at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the resilience that had kept her alive in the snow. He saw a woman who had been broken by the world and had rebuilt herself in a week. He thought of Idris Stonevale, laughing at his club, thinking he had won. He thought of the empty, echoing halls of Hollowthorne Manor, which had felt a little less lonely since she arrived. My wife, Garrick said. The silence that followed was deafening. The log in the fireplace popped, a gunshot in the quiet. Hadria blinked. I beg your pardon. Marry me, Garrick said, his voice steady, businesslike, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. Become the Duchess of Blackwood. You are mocking me. Hadria backed away, her hand flying to her throat. This is a cruel joke. I do not joke, Hadria. Look at the logic. You need protection. My title provides the ultimate shield. No one, not your uncle, not society, can touch a duchess. And He paused, looking away for a moment. I need a wife. I need an heir. And I need to show Idris Stonevale that the treasure he discarded is the very thing that will bring him to his knees. Hadria stared at him. Revenge? You want to marry me for revenge? Is that so terrible? Garrick asked, turning back to her. It is honest. More honest than a love match that rots into indifference. I offer you safety, wealth, and my name. I offer you a partnership. We understand each other, you and I. We have both been scarred by the expectations of others. And love, she asked softly. Is there no room for that? Garrick's expression softened, just a fraction. He reached out and took her hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, sending a jolt of electricity up her arm. Respect, I can promise you. Loyalty, I swear to you. Devotion, that is earned. But I suspect, Hadria, that you are a woman easy to be devoted to. He squeezed her hand. The season begins in 2 weeks. Lady Zephyra is hosting the opening ball. Idris will be there, likely with a new conquest on his arm. Imagine his face when you walk in. Not as the ruined girl he left in the snow, but as her grace, the Duchess of Blackwood. Imagine the power you will hold. Hadria closed her eyes. She imagined it. She imagined the look on Idris's face. She imagined the safety of this house, the strength of the man standing before her. She looked at Garrick, really looked at him, and saw not a savior, but a partner. A man who was offering her a sword when the world expected her to carry a shield. She opened her eyes. The violet blue was steely now. Make the arrangements, Your Grace, she said. I should like very much to see Idris Stonevale kneel. Garrick smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his dark face into something breathtakingly handsome. Then let us prepare for war, my dear, and let us make it a fashionable one. The chapel at Hollowthorne Manor was a place of austere beauty, smelling of centuries-old incense and cold stone. There were no banks of hothouse flowers, no choir of eager choristers, and no congregation of weeping relatives. There was only the droning voice of the local vicar, the flickering light of 12 beeswax candles, and the heavy, rhythmic drumming of rain against the stained glass. Hadria stood at the altar, her hand engulfed in Garrick's. She wore a gown of silver-gray silk, a hurriedly commissioned masterpiece that Winifred had bullied the village seamstress into finishing in 3 days. It was not a virginal white, nor a romantic blush. It was the color of a stormy sky, dignified and imposing. "I, Garrick, take thee, Hadria." His voice was low, devoid of theatricality, yet it carried a weight that settled into the marrow of her bones. He did not look at the vicar. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, serious, and searching. In them, she saw no pretense of a fairy tale. She saw a contract signed in blood and honor. "I, Hadria, take thee, Garrick." Her own voice trembled, but only for a heartbeat. She thought of the snow. She thought of the Red Lion Inn. She tightened her grip on his hand. When the ring slid onto her finger, a heavy band of gold set with a sapphire as dark as the ocean, it felt less like jewelry and more like armor. "I now pronounce you man and wife. Your Grace, you may kiss the Duchess." The title hung in the air, foreign and immense. Garrick leaned down. She expected a chaste peck on the forehead, a performance for the vicar and Jasper, who stood as witness. Instead, Garrick cupped her face with both hands. His thumbs traced the line of her jaw. He lowered his head and kissed her mouth. Softly, deliberately. It was not a kiss of burning passion, but it was startlingly intimate, a silent seal of protection. "You are safe," he murmured against her lips, so low only she could hear. "The world cannot break you now." The journey to London 3 days later was a military operation. The ducal carriage was a fortress on wheels, laden with furs and guarded by outriders. Inside, the dynamic between them had shifted. They were no longer savior and victim. They were allies strategizing for a siege. "Lady Zephyra's ball is the battlefield," Garrick said, reviewing a list of names Jasper had prepared. He did not look up as the carriage rattled over the cobblestones of the city outskirts. "She is the queen of the gossips. If she accepts you, the pack follows. If she rejects you, it will be a long, cold season." "She will not reject me," Hadria said, adjusting her gloves. She felt a strange calm. The terrified girl in the snow seemed a lifetime away. "She fears you too much to insult your wife to her face." Garrick glanced up, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You learn quickly. But fear is brittle. We need awe. That is why we are late." "Late?" "Fashionably. We will arrive when the room is fullest. When Idris is comfortable." Garrick's jaw tightened at the name. "He is currently courting Miss Clara Vane, a shipping heiress from Liverpool. He needs her fortune to pay the debts he believes I do not know about." Hadria looked out the window at the gaslit streets of London. It was a city that had chewed her up and spit her out only weeks ago. Now, returning in a carriage bearing the ducal crest, the city looked different. It looked smaller. "Garrick," she asked, using his name without the title for the first time since the wedding. "Why do you hate him? Truly. It cannot just be land or politics." Garrick went still. He stared at the leather squabs of the seat opposite him. For a moment she thought he would retreat behind his walls. "Idris and I were at Oxford together," he said quietly. "We were friends of a sort, until my younger sister Ilara debuted." Hadria's breath hitched. "I did not know you had a sister." "I don't. Not anymore." Garrick's voice was a flat, dead thing. "She was 17, Idris charmed her. He wrote her letters, promised her the world. He convinced her to meet him in the gardens during a winter frost, much like the one you survived. He never showed. He was winning a wager at cards. She waited 4 hours. She caught a chill that turned to pneumonia. She died 3 weeks later. Hadria covered her mouth, horror washing over her. He called it a misunderstanding, Garrick continued, his eyes hard as flint. He sent flowers to the funeral. I burned them. I vowed then that I would take everything he valued. His pride, his standing. And now. He looked at Hadria, his expression softening into something pained and fierce. Now, I have taken the only good thing he ever touched. Hadria reached across the carriage and took his hand. His grip was crushing. He will not win, Garrick, she whispered. Tonight, we end him. The ballroom at Stonecliff House was a kaleidoscope of velvet, diamonds, and malice. Lady Zephyra had outdone herself. The chandeliers were dripping with crystals. The orchestra was playing Strauss, and the air was thick with the scent of lilies and scandal. Idris Stonevale stood near the punch bowl, laughing. He looked magnificent in royal blue, his golden hair catching the light. On his arm was Clara Vane, a petite girl with wide, naive eyes, who gazed at him as if he hung the moon. "So, the rumors are true?" a gentleman asked Idris. "Westmere's niece has vanished?" Idris sighed, a perfect performance of melancholy. "Tragic affair. I tried to help her, of course, but the girl was unstable. She ran off into the night. One hopes she found a convent or perhaps a sympathetic farmer." The group chuckled. Idris smiled, lifting his glass. "To clarity," he toasted. At that moment, the heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open. The major domo, usually a man of booming confidence, hesitated. He banged his staff 3 times, but the sound was weaker than usual, as if the name he was about to announce stuck in his throat. "His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood," the man announced. A hush rippled through the room. Garrick Holothorne rarely attended balls. And the major domo took a deep breath. "Her Grace, the Duchess of Blackwood." The silence that fell was absolute. It was not the quiet of a library. It was the vacuum of space. The music faltered and died. 300 heads turned as one. Garrick stood at the top of the stairs, resplendent in severe black formal wear, the star of the garter pinning a sash to his chest. But no one looked at him. They looked at her. Hadria wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, off the shoulder, daring yet regal. Around her neck was the Blackwood diamond, a stone the size of a pigeon's egg that hadn't been seen in society for 50 years. She held her head high, her expression cool, serene, and utterly untouchable. "Impossible," someone whispered. Garrick offered his arm. Hadria placed her gloved hand upon it. Together, they began the descent. "Left foot, right foot," Hadria chanted in her head. "Chin up. You are not Hadria Westmere the Pauper. You are the Duchess of Blackwood." They reached the floor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Lady Zephyra, her mouth slightly agape, fluttered forward, her fan moving frantically. "Your Grace," she squeaked, looking from Garrick to Hadria. We were not expecting—" "We decided to surprise you, Lady Zephyra," Garrick said, his voice carrying effortlessly to the corners of the room. "My wife and I have been enjoying the quiet of the country, but one cannot keep a diamond hidden forever." "Wife?" Idris's voice cut through the tension. He pushed through the crowd, dragging poor Miss Vane with him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning terrible realization. "Idris," Garrick greeted him with a nod that was more of a dismissal. "You look well." Idris ignored him. He stared at Hadria. "Hadria, what is this game? You were—" "I was cold, Mr. Stonevale," Hadria said. Her voice was crystal clear, sweet and sharp as an icicle. But as you can see, I found warmth. But the inn. I told you, Idris stammered, his composure cracking. You cannot be married. It is a farce. Careful, Stonevale, Garrick warned, stepping slightly in front of her. The menace in his tone was subtle but lethal. You are speaking to the Duchess of Blackwood. Insult her, and you insult the crown. Idris looked around. He saw the eyes of the Tun. He saw the judgment shifting. He saw Clara Vane pull her hand away from his arm, sensing the radioactive nature of his position. Idris swallowed. I merely meant congratulations. It is a shock. I imagine it is, Hadria said. She looked him up and down, offering a pitying smile. I believe you have my gratitude, sir. If you had not been so pragmatic, I might never have found my true destiny. She turned her back on him. It was the ultimate cut. The waltz, my dear? Garrick asked. I would be delighted. As the orchestra hurriedly resumed, Garrick swept her onto the floor. They moved together seamlessly, a dark swirl of blue and black amidst the sea of pastels. You were magnificent, Garrick whispered in her ear as he spun her. He looks as though he has swallowed a toad. Did you see Miss Vane? Hadria whispered back, a thrill of victory coursing through her. She let go of his arm. The first domino falls, Garrick said. By tomorrow morning, his creditors will be nervous. By noon, they will be calling. He pulled her closer, his hand firm on her waist. For a moment, the revenge faded. Hadria felt the heat of his body, the strength of his frame. She looked up into his dark eyes and saw not the co-conspirator, but the man who had jumped into the snow for her. Thank you, she breathed. Do not thank me yet, Hadria, he replied, his gaze intense. The night is young, and the wolves are just waking up. The euphoria of the ball did not survive the dawn. The next morning, the London townhouse was under siege, not by soldiers, but by calling cards. The silver tray in the foyer was overflowing. Everyone who was anyone wanted to know the details of the Winter Duchess. But inside the library, the mood was grim. Hadria sat at the breakfast table, nursing a cup of tea. Garrick had not come down yet. Jasper had informed her that the Duke was indisposed. At 10 o'clock, the heavy knocker sounded. It wasn't a social caller. Lord Westmere, the footman announced, looking nervous. Hadria's uncle stormed in before he could be refused. He was a red-faced, blustering man with mutton-chop whiskers and the smell of stale port clinging to his coat. You ungrateful little wretch, Westmere roared, pointing a cane at Hadria. You marry a duke, and you do not even consult your guardian? Do you know what I could have negotiated for your hand? Hadria set her cup down. Her hand shook, but she forced it to be still. You negotiated me to a merchant in Bristol, uncle. I believe I found a better offer. Insolence! Westmere slammed his cane on the table. The marriage is a sham. I will have it annulled. I have rights. You have nothing, a voice rasped from the doorway. Garrick stood there. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes rimmed with red, and he was leaning heavily against the doorframe. He was not wearing his coat, only a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the sheen of sweat on his skin. Garrick, Hadria stood up, alarmed. Get out, Westmere, Garrick said, his voice weak but laced with venom. If you ever step foot on my property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing, and then I will publish the audit of how you managed Hadria's trust fund. Westmere paled. You wouldn't. Try me. Westmere looked at the Duke, then at Hadria. He sneered. He looks half dead already, girl. Perhaps you'll be a wealthy widow soon. Then we shall talk. He turned and fled. As soon as the front door closed, Garrick's knees buckled. Garrick! Hadria rushed forward, catching him just as he slumped. He was dead weight, burning with fever. "Jasper!" she screamed. The valet appeared instantly, as if he had been waiting in the shadows. Together, they half-dragged, half-carried Garrick to the sofa in the library. "It is the old wound," Jasper said grimly, unbuttoning Garrick's shirt to reveal a jagged, angry scar on his side. "From the duel. The one he fought for his sister's honor. It festers when he is under great strain." "He needs a doctor," Hadria said, pressing her hand to Garrick's forehead. He was burning up. "He refuses them," Jasper said. "He says they are butchers. He needs laudanum and rest, but he will not rest. He was up all night going through the ledgers." "The ledgers!" "The Stonevale mortgages. He is obsessed." Jasper hurried off to fetch the medicine. Hadria stayed by Garrick's side. He was delirious, muttering names. "Alara, Snow, sorry." She smoothed his hair, her heart aching. He had projected such strength, such invulnerability, all while his body was tearing itself apart. He had done it for her. To shield her from the wolves, he had let them bite him. Her eyes wandered to the desk where Garrick had been working. It was covered in papers. Curiosity, and a need to understand the man she had married, drew her to them. She picked up a sheaf of documents. They were promissory notes. Idris Stonevale's gambling debts. They were massive. But underneath them was a bundle of older letters, tied with a faded black ribbon. She shouldn't read them. It was an invasion of privacy. But one letter, sticking out, caught her eye. It was addressed to Garrick, dated 3 years ago. The handwriting was Idris's. "Garrick, if you reveal the truth about the entail, I will ruin her. I will tell the world about Alara's child. The bastard you hid away. Let the past lie and I will stay silent." Hadria froze. The room seemed to tilt. Alara hadn't just died of pneumonia. She had died in childbirth, or complications from a pregnancy. And Idris, the father, had used the child as blackmail to keep Garrick from reclaiming something called the entail. "What did you do, Idris?" she whispered, horror dawning. She shuffled through the other papers. There was a legal document, a deed, the Stonevale estate. It wasn't Idris's. The entail had been broken 2 generations ago due to a clerical error. The land actually belonged to the female line, which, through a twist of genealogy laid out in Garrick's meticulous notes, linked back to the Hollowthorne family. Garrick didn't just hold Idris's debts. He held the legal claim to Idris's very name and home, but he had sat on it. Why? Because of the child, she realized. To protect his sister's memory from the scandal of an illegitimate baby. Garrick had groaned on the sofa, shifting in his fever dreams. "Hadria!" She dropped the letters and ran back to him, kneeling on the floor. "I am here," she said, taking his burning hand. He opened his eyes. They were glassy, unfocused. "Do not let him win." "He won't," Hadria vowed, a cold, hard fury settling in her chest. She looked back at the desk, at the weapon Garrick had been too honorable to use for 3 years. He had saved her from the cold. He had given her a name and a shield. Now, while he was weak, she would be his sword. She would find this child. She would verify the deed. And she would not just bring Idris Stonevale to his knees. She would bury him. "Rest now, husband," she whispered, kissing his fevered brow. "I have the helm." The rain had turned the world outside into a watercolor painting of gray and green. But inside the carriage, Hadria's focus was razor-sharp. Garrick was still bedridden, fighting the infection that had laid him low. For 2 days, Hadria had sat by his side, cooling his brow, listening to his fevered mutterings. But today, she had left him in Winifred's capable hands. She had business that could not wait. "Are we close, Jasper?" she asked. The valet, sitting opposite her, looked older today. The lines around his eyes were deep trenches of worry. He had tried to dissuade her from this journey, citing the Duke's strict orders for secrecy, but Hadria had been immovable. "He is too sick to protect them anymore," she had said. "It is my turn." "Just over the ridge, Your Grace," Jasper replied, his voice hushed. "It is a small crofter's cottage. The Duke. He bought it 3 years ago. He pays the widow, Mrs. Gable, to care for the child." "And Idris? Does he know?" "He knows the child exists," Jasper spat the words with disdain. "He calls her the mistake. He has never seen her. He believes the Duke sent her to an orphanage in France. That was the agreement. Idris keeps the estate, the Duke keeps the secret." Hadria looked out the window, her heart aching for the man she had married. Garrick had endured the hatred of his enemy, the loss of his sister, and the silence of a lonely life, all to ensure a little girl didn't grow up with the stigma of being a mistake. He had paid for the roof over her head, likely visited her in secret, all while the world whispered that he was a cold, unfeeling recluse. The carriage bumped to a halt. The cottage was humble, thatched, and whitewashed, surrounded by a garden that, even in the rain, showed signs of loving care. Hadria stepped out, pulling her hood up. Jasper knocked on the door. It was opened by a stout, kindly-faced woman who curtsied low when she saw the ducal crest on the carriage. "Oh, we weren't expecting. His Grace usually sends word," the woman flustered. "His Grace is indisposed," Hadria said gently, stepping into the warmth of the kitchen. "I am the Duchess. I have come to see her." The woman hesitated, looking to Jasper for confirmation. He nodded solemnly. "It is time, Mrs. Gable." The woman wiped her hands on her apron and led them to the back room. There, sitting on a rug playing with a set of wooden blocks, was a little girl of perhaps 3 years. Hadria's breath caught in her throat. The child had Alara's dark curls, according to the portrait in the gallery. But she had Idris Stonevale's eyes, bright, intelligent, and unmistakably golden. "What is her name?" Hadria whispered, kneeling on the rug. "Lily, Your Grace," Mrs. Gable said softly, "because her mother loved the garden." Hadria reached out a hand. The little girl looked up, unafraid. She stared at Hadria with a solemnity that mirrored Garrick's. She didn't have a father, and her mother was a ghost. Yet she looked healthy, well-fed, and loved. Garrick had ensured that. "Lily," Hadria said, her voice trembling, "would you like to go on a trip? To a big house with a very large garden?" Jasper gasped. "Your Grace, you cannot mean to bring her to the manor. If society sees her, the scandal—" "Let them look," Hadria said, standing up and scooping the child into her arms. Lily felt solid and warm, a living weight of truth. Garrick hid her to protect his sister's memory, but hiding her has only allowed Idris to flourish. "We are done hiding, Jasper." She turned to the valet, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. "We are taking her home, and when Idris comes for his reckoning, he will find that his mistake has a voice." The drive back to Hollowthorne was quiet, but the air inside the carriage felt charged. Hadria held the sleeping child, her mind racing. She had the deed. She had the letters. And now she had the heir. She was not just a scorned bride anymore. She was the matriarch of a family that was about to reclaim its honor. 3 days later, the fever broke. Garrick awoke, weak and thirsty, to find the room bathed in sunlight. He tried to sit up, but his side screamed in protest. "Easy," a soft voice commanded. Hadria was there, looking tired but triumphant. She adjusted his pillows, her touch efficient and tender. "How long?" he rasped. "Long enough for the world to turn," she smiled enigmatically. "You must eat. Broth first, then you must dress. We have a visitor expected at noon." "Visitor?" Garrick frowned, his mind still foggy. I am in no state for guests. This one you will want to see. It is Idris. Garrick's eyes snapped open. Idris? Here? Hadria, you shouldn't have. He invited himself, she said calmly, spooning broth for him. He heard you were dying. The vultures in London are saying the Winter Duchess will be a widow before the season is out. Idris has come to sniff around the estate, to see if he can reclaim his position once you are gone. He is a fool. Garrick tried to push the blankets away. Help me up. I will meet him standing. You will meet him sitting, she corrected firmly. You need your strength for the finale. At noon, Idris Stonevale strode into the library of Hollowthorne Manor, as if he already owned it. He looked impeccable in a tweed riding coat, swinging a crop, his face flushed with arrogance. Well, well, Idris drawled, looking at Garrick, who sat in a high-backed leather chair by the fire, wrapped in a dressing gown. You look dreadful, old friend. I suppose congratulations are in order for the lady, though. Soon to be the wealthiest widow in the county. Hadria stood behind Garrick's chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. I wouldn't order your mourning clothes just yet, Mr. Stonevale. The Duke is made of stronger stuff than you give him credit for. Idris laughed, walking over to the desk. He picked up a crystal paperweight and inspected it. Is he? We shall see. I came to make an offer, Garrick. Since you have no heir and I am your closest, albeit estranged friend, I am willing to take the burden of the Stonevale mortgages off your hands. For a nominal fee, of course. It would ease your estate's complexities when you pass. Garrick remained silent, his dark eyes burning. He let Idris dig his own grave. And, Idris added, leering slightly at Hadria, I would be happy to assist the Duchess in her transition. She was always fond of me, after all. Enough, Hadria said. Her voice was not loud, but it cracked through the room like a whip. She walked to the side door of the library. We have considered your offer, Idris, but we found a better heir to the Stonevale lands. She opened the door. A governess walked in, holding the hand of a small girl in a white dress. Lily looked around the room with wide eyes, clutching a rag doll. Idris froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked as if he had been struck. He dropped the paperweight. It hit the rug with a dull thud. What? Idris choked. What is this? She has your eyes, Idris, Garrick said, his voice rough but steady. And Alara's smile. This is a trick, Idris stammered, backing away. You promised. You swore you would keep it secret. I swore to protect her, Garrick said. I did not swear to protect you. Hadria stepped forward, holding a parchment. This is the deed to the Stonevale estate. As you know, the entail was broken years ago. The land rightfully belongs to the female line of the Hollowthorne family, Alara. Since Alara is deceased, it passes to her issue. She placed the document on the desk next to the dropped writing crop. Lily is not a mistake, Idris, Hadria said coldly. She is the owner of your house. She is the landlord of your club. She is the reason you have lived on borrowed time and borrowed money for 3 years. You can't prove she is mine, Idris screamed, panic setting in. She is a bastard. She has no rights. She... We have your letters, Hadria countered, lifting the bundle from the desk drawer. In your own hand. Admitting to the paternity, admitting to the blackmail. It is enough for the Chancery Court. It is certainly enough for society. Idris looked at the letters, then at the child, then at Garrick. He saw the walls closing in. He saw the ruin. He saw the end of his bright, shallow life. Garrick, Idris pleaded, his arrogance evaporating into pathetic desperation. We were friends at Oxford. You can't let her do this. I will be destitute. I will be laughed out of London. Garrick looked at the man who had left his sister to die, and who had left his wife to freeze. He looked at Idris, and he felt nothing. The hate was gone, replaced by a profound weariness. You did it to yourself, Idris, Garrick said softly. You left Hadria in the snow. You left Alara in the rain. Now you will learn what it is like to be out in the cold." He gestured to Jasper, who was waiting by the door with 2 footmen. "Escort Mr. Stonevale off the property," Garrick ordered, "and tell the gatekeeper he is never to be admitted again." Idris was dragged out, shouting and cursing, but his voice faded as the heavy oak doors slammed shut. Silence returned to the library. Lily, startled by the noise, ran across the room. She didn't run to Hadria. She ran to the man in the chair. "Duke," she chirped, patting Garrick's knee. Garrick looked down at the child. His harsh face crumbled. He reached out a trembling hand and brushed her cheek. "Hello, Lily," he whispered. Tears, unbidden and rare, stood in his eyes. Hadria watched them, her heart swelling until she thought it might burst. The war was over. The ghosts were laid to rest. Spring came late to the Weeping Valley. But when it arrived, it was glorious. The gray moors turned a vibrant purple with heather, and the ancient trees of Hollowthorn Manor burst into green. It had been 2 months since Idris Stonevale fled to the continent, chased by creditors and scandal. The revelation of his secret daughter, managed tactfully by Hadria through select whispers to Lady Zafira, had painted Garrick not as a villain, but as a tragic, noble guardian. Society, fickle as ever, now heralded the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood as the ultimate romantic figures. But in the gardens of the manor, none of that mattered. Hadria sat on a stone bench, watching Lily chase a butterfly across the lawn. The little girl was laughing, a sound that had become the heartbeat of the house. "She is fast," a voice said behind her. Garrick walked around the bench. He was fully recovered now, his stride strong, his color returned. He looked younger, the heavy weight of secrets finally lifted from his shoulders. "She takes after you," Hadria teased, stubborn and energetic. Garrick sat beside her. He didn't look at the child. He looked at his wife. "I have been thinking," he said, his tone serious. "Oh dear, that usually leads to trouble." "I have been thinking about the contract," he continued, ignoring her jest. "The arrangement. You have fulfilled your part, Hadria. You saved my life. You restored my family's honor. You gave me this." He gestured to the happy scene before them. Hadria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Are you, dissolving the partnership, Your Grace?" "No," Garrick said quickly. He turned on the bench, taking both her hands in his. "I am saying that the terms are insufficient. I promised you safety. I promised you respect. But I did not promise you the one thing that has grown in this house, like a flower in the frost." He paused, looking vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "I did not marry you for love, Hadria, but I find I cannot live without it now. I have watched you. I have watched your courage, your kindness to a child who is not your own, your fire when you defended me." He raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "You are not just my Duchess. You are my heart. I love you, Hadria. More than I thought I was capable of." Hadria stared at him. The last defensive wall around her own heart crumbled. She thought of the man who had stopped his carriage in a storm, the man who had given her a name when she had none. "I thought I was merely a weapon to you," she whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "A way to hurt Idris." "You were never a weapon," Garrick said intensely. "You were the only light I had seen in years." Hadria smiled, leaning forward until their foreheads touched. "Then I suppose we must renegotiate the terms, husband, because I find I have fallen quite desperately in love with you too." Garrick let out a breath, a laugh of pure relief escaping him. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her, not with the gentle seal of the wedding day, but with the passion of a man who has finally come home. Across the lawn, Lily stopped chasing the butterfly and giggled, watching them. The winter was over, the frost had melted, and in the warmth of the sun, the Duke and his Duchess began their true life together. Hadria Westmere began her journey abandoned on a frozen road, stripped of everything but her dignity. She ended it as the Duchess of Blackwood, not because she was rescued by a prince, but because she recognized the nobility in a monster and had the courage to fight for the truth. Her story reminds us that true character is revealed not in the ballrooms of society, but in the storms of life. Idris Stonevale had charm, but no honor. Garrick Hollowthorne had scars, but a heart of gold. In the end, karma did not need to shout. It simply waited for the truth to be spoken. When we stand by our principles, even the coldest winter eventually yields to spring. If you enjoyed this tale of betrayal, revenge, and redemption in the snow, please like the video, share it with a fellow romantic, and subscribe for more stories where the villains get what they deserve and true love conquers all.